Hey everyone, I hope you're doing really great today. So I'm going to be doing my first ever high-end versus drugstore full face makeup challenge tutorial. For the most part, things kind of match up, but the lips became like a really unique, actually, sideways ombre that I kind of like, but I was really wishing I could have found lip colors that complemented each other a bit more, but whatever. This video is also in collaboration with my friend Alyssa. I'm sure if you are active in the beauty community that you know who she is. She is stunningly gorgeous, stunningly talented, always knocking out those makeup looks, super consistent. Her skills are just so on point, so be sure to go check out her version of this and subscribe to her channel. So if you guys want to see how to do this, want to check out some dupes, let's just roll right in. Roll into it like pigs in mud. Okay, so I'm going to start out by priming, and I'm going to be using the Marc Jacobs Coconut Primer and the L'Oreal Magic Lumi Primer. These give off an almost identical effect, both in the way they stick foundation down and the way they just look on the skin. The only difference is that the Marc Jacobs Primer is a little bit more fluid-like, and the Lumi Primer is not. For foundation, I'm going to be using the Smashbox Studio Skin and the L'Oreal Infallible Pro Glow foundations. I find that these are almost identical. I would say finish-wise and the way they blend out and everything like that, they're absolutely exactly the same. They both last a long time. The Smashbox one is slightly less coverage. I think it's meant to be designed to look more like your exact skin, whereas the L'Oreal one is just meant to give you more of a glow. So there's that difference between them, but they really are almost the exact same product. And I find that they even both kind of wear off very similarly. So if you have been wanting the Smashbox one, but $40 is too steep for you, definitely pick up the L'Oreal one instead. For concealer, I'm going to be using the Tarte Maracuja Creaseless and the Wet n Wild Celebrity Concealers. Again, these two products are very, very similar. I will say that, as you can see here, the Tarte one doesn't spread as easily. It's a lot thicker, and because of that, it can be a little bit more difficult to blend in and kind of not look like there's a ton of product on your skin. It's meant to be very, very full coverage and long lasting, so I guess that is what we can attribute that to. Whereas the Wet n Wild is a little bit thinner, a little bit easier to work with. As you can see here, I'm kind of dragging it down on a larger area to brighten up the side of the face since the foundation was darker. I find that they're pretty much the same exact product aside from this one being just slightly thinner, so it's a pretty good trade-off for those of you, again, who don't want to splurge the $40 or whatever on the Tarte one but want a very similar, cheaper product. To set the under eye, I'm going to be using the Becca Multitasking Perfecting Powder and the NYX HD Banana Powder. Again, very similar. Becca's is just a little bit more finely milled and not so brightening. As you can see here, it kind of dulled down that area just slightly, whereas the NYX one is not as finely milled but more brightening, so this one's pretty much based on your personal preferences. To bronze, I'm going to be using Tarte's Park Avenue Princess and the Butter Bronzer by Physicians Formula. These are pretty much identical in color. I find that the Physicians Formula, again, is a little bit better than the more expensive Tarte version. The Physicians Formula bronzer blends out a lot easier. As you can see here, it's just very smooth. There's not a lot of patchiness happening. Very easy to build up without like any of the product kind of sticking in place, which I find is a little bit of a common problem with bronzers. The Tarte bronzer, very intense right off the bat, even after just barely dipping it in, which again is a good sign because that means that it's very pigmented. However, it is one of those bronzers that can tend to kind of stick down wherever you first put your brush, so it requires a bit more time with blending, and you do have to be a little bit more careful with how hard you dip your brush into it. That was just showing you like the difference between the two. Moving into the brows, I'm going to be using Gimme Brow on one of my eyebrows and the NYX brow mascara on the other. I'm going to go ahead and let this play out to show you how I do my brows. This is how I do them every day. I just brush the product through it. That's pretty much it. I find that these are very similar. I feel like the Gimme Brow really is quite a high price point for the amount of product you're getting and how easily dupable it is. The NYX one is not as gel-like as the Gimme Brow. I find the Gimme Brow lasts slightly longer, whereas the NYX one is more of a crispy type of feeling. The Gimme Brow is a little bit easier to work with because the brush is smaller, whereas the NYX one can tend to be a bit messy if you have thinner or more fine brows, but either way, it's still a pretty decent trade-off. To prime the eyes, I'll be using the Too Faced Shadow Insurance and the L'Oreal Magic Decrease primers. These are extremely similar in, I would say, viscosity, which is like the thickness of the product, the way it feels, as well as just how they perform. They're very, very similar. I would say Too Faced is just slightly more almost greasy feeling, and the shadows tend to blend out a little bit more smoothly over it, as you'll see throughout this eye tutorial. But either way, they're just very similar. Really good trade-off. I'm going to be going in with all Anastasia versus Makeup Geek shadow, so I'm going to be taking Birkin and blending it out over the expensive side of my face, which has been the left side this entire time, in case anyone was wondering. I find that these two shades are almost identical. I would say the only difference happening here is due to the primers. Like I said, they perform very similarly. The shadows stick down similarly to them, but I find that the L'Oreal one can make your shadows look a bit more intense. For what it's worth, also, I'm cleaning the brush off between each application of these shadows. Then going in with Blazing and Cocoa Bear. First taking Blazing, I'm just going to apply this right into the crease area. There is a very slight tonal difference between these two shades. Blazing is a very true, like, rusty red. I don't own anything else like it. And Cocoa Bear is more of a brown based red, but on the eye you can't really tell the difference too much. I find that with a lot of shadows that are similar, even if they look quite different, they actually will end up looking quite similar on the eyes. I've only really noticed like a marked difference with shimmer shades. Usually mattes are much easier to dupe. So anyways, I'm just blending this out. As you can see, something about this made it harder to blend on the more affordable side, so I ended up having to go in with a clean blending brush to smooth out those edges. Next, I'm going in with Cabin Fever and Fudge, and this is where things got tricky. So these two shades are almost identical. This is Fudge, which is more of a brown based, like rich mahogany reddish action. Cabin Fever is slightly more red based, less brown. The thing is though, is that Cabin Fever, when you build it up to intensity, it can look almost identical to Fudge, so I feel like it's just a pigmentation difference and not so much a tonal difference. So regarding application, I just kind of patted that on so that there was no fallout. Then I'm going back in and blending everything out so that there are no harsh lines. Then I'm dipping back into Fudge with this fluffy brush and then applying that all over the lid to get like as close to a perfect gradient as I can. This is like my #1 tip when you're doing a smoky eye, is go in with a little bit of product on a fluffy brush to kind of create a nice diffusion, because it can be really hard to do that with a smaller brush. Then I'm just going in with a clean blending brush to bring some of that color up a little bit more to further enhance that gradient. Then I'm just going to be doing the same exact thing with Cabin Fever. As you can see, it's very red, but as I build it up more throughout the application process, it starts to get more of that brownish red look. And then as I diffuse it out, it becomes more red. So if you are trying to dupe Fudge and you use this shade, definitely just make sure that you really pack an intense layer on and prepare to spend some time blending it out. Then on the lower lash, I wanted to do really smoky but not really dark, so I'm going back in with Rust and Cocoa Bear, and I'm just going to create a really intense smoky lower lash line action. Nice haziness, a little bit of grunginess happening. So my tip is when you're doing this, I don't usually build up to pigmentation, I just kind of go for it, but make sure you tap off your brush and be prepared to blend out, but in a very precise manner. If you get too handsy with your blending, it can go from grungy to just messy really quick. On the inner corner, I'm taking Wine and Legend. As you can see, these are nearly identical in tone, but as I mentioned, shimmer shades can fool you in that way. They can have a different texture that kind of throws off the whole vibe. So I found that Wine wasn't quite as shimmery as Legend, as you can see here. So I ended up going back in, cleaning this brush, dampening it, and then applying Wine with the damp brush on my other eye. And as you can see, they look a little bit more similar now. For lashes, I'm going with the Lancome Sills Booster and the L'Oreal Voluminous Primer. I did this because I find a lot of mascaras are just too similar, but there is a good difference between primers. I found that the L'Oreal primer actually works a lot better than the Lancome, in my opinion. I found that the Lancome was, I don't know, not as easy to work with. The L'Oreal really kind of gripped onto the mascara, and it made my lashes look a lot thicker and more lengthened on that side with a lot less effort. I will say that the Lancome one was better at separating the lashes, whereas the voluminous one, like it's marketed, was better at making my lashes look thicker. So again, it just depends on preference, but overall the Lancome one's really expensive, so I probably will always reach for the L'Oreal version. For blush, I'm going to be using Benefit's Dandelion Blush and Essence Adorable Blush. These really are not different whatsoever in terms of how they blend out, how pigmented they are. The only difference is that the Benefit one smells really, really good, and the Essence one is completely scentless. Also, obvious difference is the price. Essence is like one of the most affordable drugstore brands out there, whereas Benefit is known for being a little bit more high priced, so definitely the best dupe in this video. The Cover FX drops and the Sephora Luminizing drops are an unexpected very similar dupe. I feel like everyone says the Sephora drops are very glittery, but honestly, these are extremely similar. I feel the Sephora ones have just a hint of glitter. The Cover FX ones are like $50, and while they're an amazing product, that is extremely expensive for the size. The Sephora ones I think are about $13, and they're very affordable, and I think you may even get more. They last just as long, they blend out just as easily, if not easier than the Cover FX. I find that the Cover FX can be hard to blend out, so definitely a great trade-off. So I didn't have any similar lip liners whatsoever, so I just decided to go all cheap and go in with NYX Peekaboo Neutral, and what I'm doing here is just what I always do, just enhancing the shape of my lips and then filling them in and using that color as the base for the liquid lipsticks that we're going to be going over it with. And for that, I'm using Sorbet by Anastasia and November by ColourPop. Not quite as similar as I was hoping. I was wanting to use like kind of a muddy, rusty, dirty pink on the lips, and I was like, these look similar enough. Absolutely not. Sorbet is more of like the color I was going for, and November is more of a warm toned mauve, so they're quite a bit different, but I was like, whatever, it's a good contrast. At least you can kind of get like a sideways ombre version of two different lip looks in one for the eyes. I don't know. Overall a fail, but formula wise they are pretty similar, pretty hydrating. So that wraps up today's video. Hope you liked it. Hope you learned something. Let me know what your best like eyeshadow dupes are, because I had some trubs. Had a little bit of trubs. Like I said, was not as easy to match them as I thought, so I'd love your feedback in the comments below. That way when I do this video again, I could perfect it. Regardless, I really hope you guys enjoyed this and found it interesting and helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and we will speak again in my next video.